for this Data Protection for Trustees, a crash course. My name is Dr. Heather Anson, and I am the Managing Director at Anson Evaluate. I think we've got in the background Amelia, who's doing our slides for us, and then I will just hand over really quickly to my colleague who will be joining me on this webinar today.
Hello everyone, my name's Peter Wright. I'm a solicitor and the Managing Director at Digital Law, and as a Digital Law we advise on these issues around data compliance, AI, cyber, and basically if it's anything to do with law and technology, we advise on it, and we've been helping our clients on that for 10 years. So I'm looking forward to sharing a few insights with you today from what we've learned from our work with our clients both in the UK and around the world.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. Well, we'll get started, and I will tell you a little bit about what Anson Evaluate does and why we're doing this. One of the reasons is I'm going to give a shout out to one of our attendees today, which is Peter Robert Shaw Corbett, who I've known for over a decade now. He's a absolute star in terms of the in terms of everything, but also in the charity sector, and founder of Hope in Community, and probably the reason we're doing this today, because he's very passionate about making sure that compliance is happening. Why is it so important, though, for charities to know this? The reason why, and trustees in particular, the reason why is charities have sort of a unique position when it comes to data protection. And again, we're talking about UK data protection. So that's the Data Protection Act of 2018 and the UK GDPR. People just say GDPR. This is what we're meaning. So there is European GDPR, but there's also UK GDPR, which includes the Data Protection Act and GDPR UK regulations. So just to make that clear, because I do believe we have attendees from outside the UK. So just want to make clear we are just talking about this from a UK perspective. So why is it important, particularly for trustees? Well, charities have this position where they're very reliant on people, whether it be donors who provide the financial resources, or volunteers who provide the boots on the ground for their services, or those people who they provide their services to, or a combination of all of those. Well, the thing with that is those people that the organization is highly dependent on, the data, personal data you're going to be collecting from them is almost certainly going to contain what is called special category data. And special category data is sensitive personal data. So things like financial information, religious or political beliefs, health conditions, and things like that. So things that are very sensitive are called special category data under the law. And that means that you have approximately twice the amount of compliance exercises you have to do to make sure that type of data is secure. So we're wanting to make sure you understand what your responsibilities are under that. And as a trustee, know that it is ultimately your responsibility to make sure that your organization is following the law appropriately. Now, from a standpoint of what the principles are, the core principles of data protection, people talk about things like what is your legal basis, if you've ever heard that before. That's only one part of it, and that's the first part of one of the key principles. Lawfulness, which means why are you processing the data? Why are you gathering the data and processing it? It wants to make sure you're doing it fairly, that you're doing it in a way that's transparent. That's why you have things like privacy policies and privacy notices. Then we have to look at what the other principles are. So everything on this page that we're showing you now are basic principles that come into play, which if your organization takes them on board will help you become more compliant. So we've got the first one, lawfulness, fairness, and transparency. Make it clear what you're doing, why you're processing it, and do it fairly. Purpose limitation. So when I say your legal basis, why are you collecting the data? What is it? What is the compliance for? So you have specific reasons for collecting that data, and they are one of the 6 legal bases for that. Now the next thing would be data minimization. That means that you're only going to collect the data that you absolutely need for what you are doing in your organization. For example, gift aid. You have to collect certain data because it's a requirement for the government that you provide this information in order to receive the gift aid. And you want to make sure that you are collecting what you need, but no more than that. We have a tendency sometimes, especially in charities who want to do so much for people, that we might be doing things to help, but if we don't think about what it is we're doing and think about why we're collecting data, we might be collecting a lot more data about the people involved in our organization than we absolutely need to. Accuracy. We all make mistakes. I know I do all the time. So it's important when you are taking in data and processing data that you do your best to make sure it's accurate, but also when you are told by a data subject in particular that you have got some data wrong, that you have the ability to correct it. So making sure that there is a method for ensuring that data is correct, or changing it when you determine that it's not correct. Do everything with integrity and confidentiality. Now, confidentiality means that what is supposed to stay private will stay private, obviously. Some stuff will be open to the public, but that will be things that specifically data subjects have agreed to. We want to be incredibly careful, though, when you're dealing with particularly vulnerable adults or children, because then your integrity and your confidentiality becomes especially important. You have to make sure you're protecting that data very, very carefully. The last bit is probably the thing that I talk about the most when it comes to the work that I do with organizations, which is accountability. Make sure that you are demonstrating compliance with what the above principles are. You can do that with policies, but the important bit is that you have the processes that back up those policies. So make sure that you're not just copying something online or something that another charity gave you, saying, oh, this is what our privacy policy is. Great, copy, paste, put in a folder, don't do anything about it. That's not demonstrating compliance. That's not accountability. That is a cut and paste exercise. It won't secure the data. So make sure that you are putting in place the processes that back that up. All right, if we can move to the next slide, I think that is Peter who's going to give you that information.
It is. Thanks, Heather. So yeah, we're looking here at, who is the regulator and what do they do? So the regulator, when it comes to regulating and enforcing what it says in the UK Data Protection Act and UK GDPR, is the UK Information Commissioner's Office, which you may often hear those three initials, the ICO, and we'll be talking a lot about those today. The Information Commissioner has quite significant enforcement powers. They can issue these information notices, enforcement notices, monetary penalty notices, those fines, and they can also say, look, we want you to stop doing this, we want you to stop doing that, and then that's what they call advisory and corrective powers. So first of all, I think the key point to realise there is that the ICO has power not just to issue fines, large that they may be. You may have heard of significant fines given to British Airways or Marriott Hotels for some of the data protection breaches that they've been responsible for. However, they can also do things like issuing reprimands. Now, you might think, well, so what? If I'm not being fined, why is that so bad? Well, that then follows you around. If, for example, your organisation has a reprimand against its name, okay, you haven't got to pay a fine, but then it means that everyone's aware that you've had an issue with regards to your enforcement of the law and how you're following it, and it's been sufficiently bad for the Information Commissioner to issue that reprimand. So there's lots of things that they can do from that perspective. Not only do they have powers with regards to sort of issuing fines and people getting in touch with them when they aren't happy with how an organisation might be controlling or processing data, they also issue a huge amount of guidance, help, support and advice. They also have quite a useful phone line that you can contact, but always remember that when you call them and talk something through, that's not the same as, for example, getting legal advice. And we do have to say to our clients quite often who say, oh, we called the Information Commissioner and they told us this was okay, to which we say, did you get that in writing? And they say no, and you say, well, that's going to be a problem there. So sometimes it's useful to get that sort of sounding board, but not necessarily the sort of thing that you could then rely on if you're then 2 or 3 years later trying to explain to the ICO why something's gone wrong and what you're trying to do about it. So that's those 3 initials, the UK Information Commissioner's Office. There are data protection regulators around Europe and around the world for countries that have their own version of data protection law. There's indeed something called the European Data Protection Board that looks at data protection in Europe and all the regulators there, but we're focusing on the UK today for the purposes of this discussion. I should also emphasise that all of today's discussion will also be going up online. You'll be able to find it on our YouTube channel, and it'll be going out as a podcast as well. So don't feel you've got to write everything down and not some of these very dense slides. You will be able to get all this information later on as well. But I will now pass back to Heather with regards to what the Information Commissioner expects.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for the reminder about the recording, and it will be available. So I'm going to talk briefly about best efforts. So some of you may be from large charities, some of you may be from very small charities, and there is a tension. People think, well, we're a small charity, we can't do this, and we can't do all the things that the large charities do. Well, the ICO does take that into account. It asks for what is called best efforts. So you don't say, oh, we can't afford it, we can't do anything about it because we're too small. They don't want you to do that, but they don't expect you to put the resources behind it that, say, a Macmillan's would. Macmillan's is a quite large charity, so they would be able to resource this type of compliance in a much greater way, and would therefore be looked at by the ICO as having a much greater responsibility. So if you're a trustee of one of these larger organizations, you'll want to make sure that you're appropriately resourcing the department. However, if you're like Hope in Community, like Peter's company, Peter Robert Shaw, Corbett, sorry, that's confusing, Peter RC, I'll just call him that. So that is a small charity with very few resources comparatively. So, but it's still important for them to recognize that. And again, shout out to Robert RC, who does take it Peter RC, who takes it very seriously. And it doesn't mean you throw a lot of resources at it. What it does is you look to share resources. You do what you can with the money with the resources you have. You look at things like, if you have technology, turning on the settings for multi-factor identification for logins, making sure you're using recommended servers for your website, things like that. Make sure that when you are using certain technologies or when you're doing things, that you're making the right choices. Not you're spending more money, but you're making the right choices. And you should probably be, if you're a smaller organization, you should be looking at pooling resources with other charities who have the same obligations. That's something we do at Anson Evaluate, is provide what's called outsourced DPO, data protection officer services, because small charities like that, big ones like Macmillan, they will have their own data protection officer. That's the compliance person who is in charge of making sure all of these compliance things are in place. And if you are combining everything, then you'll be able to utilize combined resources. I'm going to pass over. We have limited time, so sorry if I'm speeding through this, but I'll pass this back over to Peter.
Okay, thanks, Heather. So what I wanted to start now is just looking at why governance is so important. What do we indeed mean when we talk about data governance? This is having the right processes in place, the right rules that show and can demonstrate that your organization is handling personal data that identifies an individual in a way that is in accordance with the law and regulations in the UK, in England and Wales. And the point here is that this is all very much about demonstrating to the regulator, to the ICO, that you're doing everything in the right way and in accordance with what is required. It is essential to do this to show that you are complying with the law. It also informs data subjects, so they can then find out by looking at your privacy policy or looking at other policies that you might have on your website, cookies, data, etc. They can see, because you're demonstrating and being transparent, they can see how you as an organization are handling their personal data, how you're collecting it, how you're storing it, how you're processing it, who you might be sharing it with, how long you'll keep hold of it for, how long it'll be retained, how it'll be retained, and then what might happen at the end of the life cycle in terms of data retention and deletion. This also then helps to build trust. It's the sort of thing that you might be able to you can use this documentation to demonstrate to partners, other stakeholders that, look, these are the processes and rules that we have in place. It helps to build trust. It helps to encourage people to share data with your organization. And ultimately, it can hopefully build that trust and encourage sharing of data with your organization, and your organization might then be encouraged to share data with others in a transparent way in accordance with the law, but underpinned by the data governance processes that you're demonstrating through your governance policies as a whole. Go to the next slide, please. So what are some of the risks and practical considerations? What we've wanted to do here is to actually give you a little bit of a toolkit. We're approaching this from the point of view of it's not so much today, we're not looking at data protection law for charities. This is data protection for trustees, as in those who are bearing responsibility for the way that the organisation is being run, but aren't necessarily there at the coalface on a day-to-day basis. But it is important to be able to scrutinise in trustee meetings how information is being handled, what data protection measures you may have in place, and indeed to be able to sometimes scrutinise and interrogate some of the information that you're being given. Sometimes there is a temptation when briefings are being given in meetings with regards to what seems like a fairly dry issue around IT or data, that there can be an awful lot of jargon, there can be an awful lot of legalese, and for the majority of trustees, they're going to probably not understand what's happening fairly early on in that discussion. And what I wanted today was to give you a few basically a toolkit in terms of things to look for. There's lots of text on this slide. Don't worry, you can take a look at this presentation on YouTube afterwards, and you can pause it and take a look at this at your leisure. We'll also have these slides available for those who'd like to see them as well, prepared via Canvas, so we can share that with you. But what we're looking at here is sort of some of the risks that can come up. So if you're regularly, for example, in trustee meetings having to look at your organisation's risk register, these are some of the things that ideally should be highlighted on there when we're looking at how data is being handled. What are we doing with our fundraising data? What cybersecurity measures do we have in place? We've had several major outages that have occurred just in this year alone, where quite major platforms have gone down. Cloudflare just went down this week, that affected numerous platforms. And this can mean that, for example, things are impinged operationally, data can be at risk. And you want to be thinking, well, if that happens, has my organisation looked at the risk and what are we doing about it? And you can see there in the right-hand columns we're putting together, well, what should you be doing to mitigate this? Demonstrating compliance to the regulator is always about showing we have identified this risk and this is what we're doing to manage and ameliorate that risk. So, for example, if it comes to how you're working with third-party processors or IT suppliers, so if you've got your data in the cloud, if you've got an app that you've developed so that your fundraising volunteers can be out there in the community using an app to collect data, to share data, how does that work? What suppliers are you working with? Making sure those contracts are being properly scrutinised. And then making sure then that you can, for example, monitor performance. Do you have a service level agreement with these third parties? Are you able to then, what happens if, for example, there's a data protection breach that occurs to the third party, but it's your data? How will you then be able to work with that third party to make sure they will work with you when it comes to reporting everything to the Information Commissioner? So it's these sort of practicalities that I think it's really important for trustees to be able to talk about and to make sure that when it comes to managing risk, you're talking about this and saying, well, what are we doing about this? And sometimes you're going to sound like a broken record in trustee meetings, because each time you'll come in and you say, well, what are we doing about this? You know, trying to make sure that it doesn't get forgotten about, it doesn't fall down the back of the sofa. So that's really what we're talking about when it comes to this element of governance and managing that risk. And that brings us then on to trustee accountability. So from here, it's a matter of then thinking, well, what can be done? Is it possible to assign accountability in terms of who is responsible for data protection on a day-to-day basis. Sometimes this gets sort of palmed towards the IT or technical minded staff, or sometimes it's sort of passed off on the nearest Gen Z person who's comparatively young and tech focused, and they're saying, it's like, right, can you handle this? But it should be someone who is sufficiently skilled and has a sufficiently strong working knowledge of what the laws and regulations are, so that they can effectively tell the trustees, these are the mechanisms we have in place and this is what we're doing about it. So that point of accountability is really important, as well as having the right data governance in place. Bear in mind that you don't ever want to be in a position whereby, oh, we've got a major problem and it turns out the person responsible for that simply isn't available. So it should be about having structures, mini subgroups or committees that are responsible and take on these responsibilities. So if you have a problem at 8 o'clock on a Sunday evening with regards to your organization's tech or a data breach, you can then work out, well, who's going to be responsible for this and which group is going to pick it up and work on it. Once you've then got these sorts of breach response plans in place, you can then regularly review these in your board meetings and make sure it's properly tracked on your risk registers and internal audits. And these should be organic documents as well. Once you've got these policies in place, they have to be worked on and updated on a regular basis, at least annually, if not more often, because they will evolve as your organization evolves and as you collect and use different types of data. So there should be the constant need to make sure that systems are secure and updated, and also that they reflect modern changing standards. Bear in mind from a cybersecurity perspective that risks and threats change and evolve all the time, but those are then threats to the data that your organization is monitoring and responsible for in a very real and legally binding way. So therefore, updating these systems, monitoring incidents as they happen, learning from them, not trying to brush them under the carpet, but learning from them, reporting to the regulator on when you do get breaches, and they will expect you to report on breaches. Even if it's a near miss that doesn't constitute a data, but it's a breach, but is something that you can learn from, and certainly then put in mitigation strategies to make sure it doesn't happen again. And also have a paper trail, document decisions, have different evolutions of policies so you can show, look, we've updated this 3 times in the last 5 years. That is part of being able to demonstrate to the regulator that you're on top of these risks and you're mitigating them all the time. Document those decisions and demonstrate compliance. If you walk away from this today with 2 words ringing in your ears, I want it to be demonstrating compliance. That's what the organisation has to do on a daily basis. Questions to ask in trustee meetings that you need answers to. Where is personal data stored? Do not accept the answer, oh, it's in the cloud. If it's in the cloud, that means it's on a server somewhere. Is that in the UK? Is it in Europe? Or the European Economic Area, which includes the EU member states plus Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein? Does it mean that data is stored further away in the US? If it is in the US, there are certain things that should be in place in terms of data transfer agreements, standard contractual clauses, etc. So you have to really drill into this to find out where that data is being stored. How is personal data being collected? Mapping data across an organisation. If you've got volunteers out there collecting, talking to people in the streets, going door to door, working in stores, working at different events, venues, for example, how are you collecting information? How are you collecting data? Are you taking in cash? Are you taking in sort code and account numbers? It's a matter of making sure you're tracking how all this organisation, how all this data is washing into the organisation, where it's then being stored, how it's being stored, and then how long you retain it for. You can't necessarily retain it indefinitely. You should have a clear data retention policy in place. This is really important because you want to demonstrate that you keep hold of data, you review it, and ultimately there is a lifespan whereby it is then deleted. So being able to account for that to the Information Commissioner through your policies becomes so very important for that reason. And if you're unclear on any answers that you get, well, you know, sometimes it is a matter of scrutinizing the answers. As we said, don't be sort of marveled by tech speak, jargon and legalese that you may end up hearing. So make sure you can scrutinize the answers that you receive. For example, if you're told, oh, well, the data's in the cloud, it's then saying, well, where in the cloud is it? How secure is that data? Are there encryption standards in place? You don't need to understand what those encryption standards are, but you certainly need to know if they're in place or not. It's also a matter of knowing, well, how does this data work? Is it encrypted and secure in transit or only at rest? these are all the sorts of questions to ask, and then also a matter of, once you've got that answer, make sure you understand it and you haven't just been, I'm afraid, fobbed off sometimes, which is what they try and do in these meetings, to try and move on to the next thing. If we can go to the next slide, please. So that's kind of the whistle-stop tour there, and I'll now pass over to Heather to try and give us a summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know this is a lot to cover in a half hour. We've got the core principles. So just remember there are principles at the base of all data processing, and if you're bringing things in. What's important with these principles is that you, from the top down, as trustees, create a culture that data protection compliance is important, that it's not scary. It may sound scary, but if you're approaching it correctly, if you're approaching it with those principles in mind, then it should just be that we're going to make sure that we're taking care of the information that people are giving to us, because that's important. That's an important culture within the charity. That's what we need to do. Make sure from the level of the board that you are creating that accountability. Make sure this happens across the board with legal documents in particular, that you're given these things and they just look complicated. It's more important that you understand what's in them than they look like they were written by a solicitor. It's much more important that you understand it, and that the people in your organization understand it. If you understand it, then you'll be able to implement the processes and procedures. So it's very important that you do understand what is happening. Make sure that you have this accountability, that you are doing it correctly. Now, there are a lot of things that happen. There are breaches that happen. There are people who say, this is overwhelming, I can't do this. Just know that there are resources out there, such as the ICO. There are free resources out there, but there are also resources that if you are a smaller charity, you can combine resources, combine your efforts and do things like outsource DPO. Now, we do provide outsourced DPO at Anson Evaluate. We do it with the assistance of Digital Law. We work together quite a bit. We have pricing for the third sector. This is not trying to be a hard sell on it. It's trying to say that if you do not have the resources within your organization to handle this, which a lot don't, or you don't have the bandwidth to actually implement all of this yourselves, then you can outsource the DPO services to someone like our business, because this is what we do. We make things straightforward. We make things accessible, and we provide training that it is accessible as well. But also for groups of charities, because we know that is something that'll be important for charities that are quite small, that we will be willing to take groups. And this is something that is allowed under the Data Protection Act and UK GDPR. We're allowed to have DPOs from groups. So we're allowed to act for a group of charities. So what you would want from a DPO, whether it's ourselves or in-house DPO or another DPO outsourced service, is you'll want them to be communicating directly with you as trustees. That is key under the data protection laws. They have to be reportable to the highest level, which is the trustees. You have to meet with them regularly. When you have quarterly meetings, it's best to have the data protection officer either reporting at that meeting or attending that meeting to give a report, or providing a report ahead of time if there is not new information that needs to come in. Make sure that they are giving you the information in a way that you can understand it. Make sure that the things we were talking about, having the culture, having the compliance, say, what are our policies, what are the procedures that you've got to back it up, and what are we doing to make sure that this is happening correctly. Okay, finally, there are different ways to get the resources too. We have a Substack on cybersecurity. We don't have the data protection one up yet, but this is Substack. For anyone who hasn't heard of it, it's essentially like an online magazine, and there are lots of them out there, but we have a cybersecurity one, and we will be coming up with a data protection one. It's something you can subscribe to that will provide you information about things in your organization and can be the basis of in-house training as well. And next slide. We have here also a podcast that is produced by Anson Evaluate, but is Peter's baby, so you can tell them all about this.
Indeed. So the Digital Law Podcast, we put out a few times a month, basic discussions with regards to different topics, everything from looking at recent stories in the news, so for example, major data protection breaches and issues, as well as sometimes looking at big developments, and we've had a lot of developments this year. So if you take a look on our YouTube channel, Digital Law, just search on YouTube, you will find an archive there of the videos of all of our previous discussions, including some that we've done on special topics like the Online Safety Act, as well as also the UK Data Use and Access Act, the new data protection legislation that came in this year from the current government. So we make sure that those resources are there. There's, as I say, a lot of discussions, a lot of things that are totally free. So please do feel free to take a look on YouTube, but it's also a podcast. So go on to Spotify, Apple, your podcatcher of choice. You should be able to find us, and you can then follow again for free and listen to new episodes when they come into your podcast feed, and then you can listen to them when you're doing things like driving the car or walking the dog. But it's really a matter of the information's there, and you can hopefully access it in whatever way works for you.
And I believe this webinar will be uploaded as a podcast as well, so you'll be able to, again, listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. We really appreciate for everyone who attended today, and copies of this will be available on the YouTube channel and as a podcast and Digital Law. Thank you very much, and hopefully this has been useful to you, and we look forward to anything we can do to help this sector.